This is a presentation of the New York State and CSCA Partnership for Education and Training. My name is Eddie Encarnacion, and I'll be your host for our webinar. Our facilitator today will be Kim Anderson. At this point, I'm going to mute everyone's phones to keep background noise to a minimum. If you have a question, you can go ahead and type it in the chat box, which is located at the bottom of the screen. Also, we have a feature which involves you raising your hand. So I'd like you to try raising your hand now. Please click on the raise hand button. Great. And for those of you who are new, the raise hand button could be found at the bottom of the screen, right next to the little smiley face or reactions button. Now go ahead and put your hand down by clicking on that raise hand button again. Excellent. As I mentioned previously, today's webinar is sponsored by the New York State and CSCA Partnership for Education and Training, or as many people refer to it, the partnership. Some of you may be wondering, what is the partnership exactly? Well, for those of you who aren't familiar with us, the partnership is a joint organization that administers education and training programs for CSCA represented employees through labor management cooperation. It is funded through negotiated agreements between New York State and CSCA. The partnership offers in-person classroom training, online learning, educational advisement services, grants, tuition benefits, labor management services, and other education and training programs, including the webinar you are attending today. The partnership is a joint labor management organization whose mission is to promote career mobility, improve job skills, support workplace safety and health, and promote effective labor management relations. You can learn more about us on our website or by calling us directly. I'll provide our contact information again at the end of today's webinar. Now that we all know a little bit more about the partnership, let's get started with the Essentials of Report Writing webinar. I'd like to turn the presentation over to your instructor, Kim Anderson.
Thank you so much, Eddie. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. As Eddie mentioned, my name is Kim Anderson. And professional development classes to our region and the greater state of New York. So let's get into the webinar. Some of us feel a bit nervous when we are asked to write a report. But if you follow the strategies and suggestions that we're going to share today, I hope you'll find that it's easier than you think. But before we start talking about those strategies, let's stop to ask a question. In your opinion, what do you think makes a report different from other types of writing, such as an email, a memo, or a short story?
Please type your ideas of what makes a report different in the chat box. If you haven't opened the chat box yet, you can do that by clicking on the chat button at the bottom right. Make sure that you have selected everyone in the drop-down box, then press enter to share your answers. Okay, Kim, and we have some responses in the chat. Factual info. Tanisha says it shows data. Never know who will be reading it. The style of the document. Needs to be formal language. Reports are based on research. It is void of your personal emotions or experiences. Collection of data. All great responses, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, I completely agree with Eddie. Fabulous responses, great participation so far. So at its heart, a report is an objective or factual investigation and description of a situation. Many reports suggest solutions or recommendations for improvement, and most reports have common subsections. Unlike other types of writing, such as emails or memos, which may be persuasive, reports are a type of writing that concentrate on facts and not opinions. it may be helpful to think of some examples. Some common report types are progress reports on a work project, recommendations about a workplace issue, maybe an incident report, or meeting minutes. Most of us only write short reports, or perhaps only a few paragraphs or pages. But some of you may also be part of a team of people who help write lengthy formal reports. For example, the New York State Department of Health releases an annual report on public health in the state. As I said, some of these reports are very lengthy and formal. They generally follow a strict format and may not include recommendations or conclusions. Instead, these reports are usually written for a large audience. For example, the comprehensive annual financial report shown on the screen is designed to inform New York State citizens how taxpayer money is spent. Shorter, everyday reports Now that we all have an idea about what reports are and why we use them, let's take a look at our objectives for today's webinar. First, we'll discuss how to identify the goal of a specific report. Then we'll talk about how to gather and analyze data for meaning, and then organize those ideas based on your goal. We will also discuss how to take what you've learned from your data and put it into a written format. Lastly, for homework, we'll be asking you to practice what you've learned by writing a short report. We'll discuss this more at the end of the hour, including the instructions and the deadline. So just to be clear, while we will be covering some tips on writing, how to write is not the focus of today's webinar. We will not cover things like spelling, word choice, or grammar. If you'd like more practice with these writing skills, we encourage you to take our Avoiding Common Punctuation and Grammar Mistakes webinar or the Writing Effective Reports and Evaluations, which is an in-person class. As mentioned a moment ago, reports do have differences from other types of writing. But as we go along, we'll see that much of what you've learned in other types of writing will help here too. Today, we'll focus on the essential steps of writing reports. First, you need to determine the goal or the purpose of the report. Next, you need to gather and evaluate your information, then organize your ideas in an easy to follow order. Finally, you will write your report. So let's get started. I have a question first, though. How many of you try to find out what the overall goal of your report is before you start writing it?
If you usually try to find out what your goal is before you start writing, please click on the raise hand button. Kim, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna raise my hand as well because I am one of those folks.
Great.
And I see I am not the only one. I see quite a few hands up in the air. Thank you everyone for participating. Yep, and there's more hands going up and now more hands going back down. Thank you all.
That's great. Thanks for participating. So in the next few slides, I'll tell you why I think it's important to find out as much as you can about your goal before you do anything else. So what do we mean when we say the goal of the report? The goal is made up of the audience, content, and purpose. So before you do Are you reporting on an incident or analyzing a problem? This will be your content. And number 3, why are you writing this report? Is it to help someone make a decision or to make a recommendation for the future? This will be your purpose. In fact, in addition to these 3 questions, don't forget to also ask the person who assigns you the report a couple more things. For example, you'll want to know when the report is due, whether they will just want the data or a recommendation, and what format they want you to deliver the report in. Will it be emailed or printed, etc.? If you have the option, you may want to ask to see if anyone else has done this report before so that you can use it as a template. So the first goal question is, who is your audience? How well do you know your potential readers? Are they in your unit or department or a different agency altogether? And do you know what they're going to do with the information? Knowing your audience tells you what kind of language to use, like formal or informal, how much detail to give, and what kind of information they may be looking for. For example, if you're writing a progress report just for your immediate supervisor, you may not need to explain what the project is or why it's necessary in the report. Instead, you might focus on a brief summary of your current and future tasks and mention any challenges you've run into. On the other hand, if you are writing a report that will go to the head of the department, you may need to provide more of the big picture and only a few supporting details because they won't really need that level of detail. If you are not sure who your audience is, you should ask your supervisor or the person who asked you to write the report. The second goal question is, what is our content? Content is the topic of the report. So the big question here is, what am I writing about? At the beginning of the webinar, we discussed a couple of lengthy formal reports. One was from the Department of Health. The content of that report was Public Health in New York State. This report covers a lot of content, but reports don't always have to be that way. Most of the time, our reports will focus on a single project or incident at an agency or facility. So I'm curious, in your agency,
Box. And I saw Russell earlier put that he's never written a report. Well, lucky you, Russell. Lucky you. But Tammy says a simple. Oh, Russell actually says Excel spreadsheets, accident reports, admission reports, disciplinary action. We have figures in admission, staffing and accident. I see a couple of Excel reports. We haven't written any reports, but we do reviews, monthly reports, etc. All good examples of reports that you write at your agencies. Thank you so much for participating.
all right.
Sarah says we run a lot of reports.
All right, what do you think, Eddie? We had some good feedback?
Yes, yes, it's all yours.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for sharing your ideas. So let's move on to the third goal question. Purpose. The purpose of your report is going to be crucial when you are deciding how to analyze and present your content. So the question here is, why am I writing this report? Is your purpose to provide information, or is it maybe to advise the reader to do something? If you are purely providing information, you only need to explain the facts. If your purpose is to give advice or recommend an action, you will need to take a deeper dive into the content. When this is your purpose, you will need to ensure that you are providing solid support for any of the claims that you make. All right, let's put into practice what we're talking about. So Letitia has been asked to give her manager a progress report that shows how far along the supervisors in her unit are in style report to her manager that highlights any supervisors that are at risk to miss the deadline. Her manager reminds her that the initial performance evaluation meeting is usually what takes the longest in the process. So, given this information, what is Letitia's goal? Think about the 3 parts as you answer in chat.
Please type your ideas about the 3 parts of Letitia's goal in the chat. Okay, Pamela says audience, her supervisor. Tammy says same thing, audience, HR. To inform her supervisor who is on task and who is falling behind. We have a few audience, supervisor, manager. Uh, Content, who is falling behind, supervisor, audience. Okay, all good responses. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, that is super. Ah, they're still coming in. All right. But we don't want to be here till 5, right? So let's get back to the webinar. So that's awesome. Great responses. Remember, the goal is a combination of the audience, content, and purpose. So in this case, the goal is a combination of the audience, Letitia's manager, we saw that a lot in chat, the content, which is the performance evaluation submissions, and the purpose, which is a progress report. Are there any questions about determining the goal of a report before we move on to the next section?
If you do have a question, please type it in the chat. Also, we will have a Q&A session at the end of today's webinars where you can also ask your questions. So I'll give everyone a minute to see if any questions pop up in the chat. And Kim, I don't see any questions at this time. I think it's safe to say we can move on.
Great, thanks, Eddie. Once you've figured out the goal of the report, the next step in the process is to gather and analyze the information you'll need for your report. So it's time to think about the information or the data that you'll need. Do you need any documents, spreadsheets, or research? And if so, where will you find these things? Do you need to gather data by talking to people? And if so, whom should you talk to? And what are you hoping to get from them? So when you're answering these questions, keep the goal of your report in mind. Your goal will guide you to important information and will help you to remove the unnecessary details. Much of the information you need to gather for a report in the workplace can be collected from other All right, we have another practice. So let's say that Paul's unit needs a new printer. His supervisor has asked him to do some research on printers that would meet the needs of the team so that she can make an informed decision. His supervisor specifically wants to know the cost and features of Paul's top 3 choices. Can you guess what kinds of information he may need to gather?
Please type your ideas about the information Paul needs to gather in the chat box. Okay, who uses it? Michelle says, is there a contract? How many people will be using this printer? Printing speed, printing capacity, cost, the types of copiers and cost, how often. These are awesome. These are all good responses, everyone. A price, yes, so much. Yeah, thank you for participating.
Yeah, great work. Great idea sharing. So we know that Paul will need to learn more about the types of printers that their unit can purchase, and he'll also need to find out the cost of these printers and their features, much like you've already mentioned. So how will he get that information? Can their unit buy any printer on the market, or will he need to ask someone to direct him to the list of printers available on that state contract? If he's not sure, he may need to ask a coworker or go back to his supervisor and ask. Once he knows the models of the printers their unit can buy, he can go to the internet to see a list of features or look at reviews from people who currently own a printer. One final and important thing that Paul should ask his supervisor is whether she would like him to just present the information in the report or whether he should make a recommendation about one of the printers based on his research. If you remember when we discussed some of the formal reports at the beginning of the webinar, not all reports need to include recommendations. Once you've gathered your information, it's a good idea to think about how to display it in your report so that it's easy to understand at a quick glance. Remember, a busy supervisor may only have time to skim through your report. So instead of writing out all of the information about the 3 printers in a paragraph, Paul should consider highlighting the most important information he found in a way that's easy to scan quickly. Numbered or bulleted lists are good ways to emphasize important points or show things in a particular order, such as steps in a process. Lists typically show a single type of information. Tables generally have columns and rows and help you to compare several different data elements or facts. And then graphs and charts, such as pie charts and bar graphs, like the one shown here, are another way to show the relationship between the data elements, but it does it in a more visual way. This bar graph quickly shows the relative costs of 3 printers. And the chart, it can be created in Excel and then copied to Word or to an Outlook email message. If a list, table, or chart makes things easier for your audience, your reader, consider adding one. However, using too many of these strategies makes them less effective overall. A short report, for example, might use only one of these data highlighting methods. In this case, Paul decided to use a table to show his information. As you can see, tables can have column and row headers to help make the information clearer and more reader-friendly. This format would let Paul's supervisor compare the most important information about the top 3 printers at a glance. More details about each printer could be explained in the paragraphs around the table or listed at the end of the report. Once you've organized your information, you're ready to analyze and draw conclusions. To do this, you'll review and compare the various data points and try to pull meaning from them. It helps to have a question in mind, such as, what kind of printer do we really need? And then examine the data for the answer. This may like any other. So of course it can be improved over time and with practice. If Paul's supervisor did not need a recommendation, his data analysis would be done at this point. But what if he needs to give a recommendation? Based on the information in this table, which printer would you suggest to your supervisor? If you remember, the supervisor told us that cost and double-sided printing are important factors.
Please let us know which printer you'd recommend in the chat box. Okay, and right away I'm starting to see a lot of Canon printers. There was an HP printer thrown in there. Yeah, I see Canon because it's the fastest and does two-sided. A couple of HPs. Uh, Kim, I think it's safe to say that the majority of the group are going with the Canon printer. Thank you, everyone.
All right, so let's take a closer look. Here's how I looked at the data that Paul collected. So he compared 3 printers. Those are the rows. The header printer model helps us to understand that. Information about each printer is shown down the columns, and the header features tells us that. So there are a couple of ways to compare these printers. We could look at total cost, in which case the Epson printer is the cheapest. And at quick glance, I don't think anybody chose an Epson. We could also look at the ways that the printer handles paper. If we needed to print on both sides of the paper, the Epson won't work. If we don't need to print on tabloid-sized paper, then the Canon printer might be best. It prints on two sides and it's cheaper. However, if we were to consider cost over the life of the printer, the average cost of ink or toner per year is more expensive with the Canon, and it would cost us more than the HP printer in the long run. The HP doesn't print quite as fast as the Epson, but print speed was not one of the factors that the supervisor mentioned. So if we wanted to recommend a printer that has the features we want, but has a lower overall cost, it would be the HP. So let's try analyzing another set of data. Again, we'll go through it together, and we're back to Letitia. So she was writing a progress report about performance evaluation submissions. See, which supervisor would you say is closest to being done with their staff's performance evaluations? Is it Kowalski or Lee?
Please type your idea about which supervisor is closer to being done in the chat box. Is it Kowalski or is it Lee? Okay, and I see quite a few people are saying Lee. There were a couple of Kowalskis. Lee is far behind. Kowalski just needs to sign off. Kowalski still needs more time. All right, Kim, so I'm going to say that the majority are with Lee.
Okay, so let's break this down also. Thanks for sharing your ideas, everybody. So Lee has submitted 1, where Kowalski has submitted 0. So at first glance, Lee is ahead. If the supervisor only wanted to know the overall progress, Letitia would be done. But her supervisor also asked her to note the employees who are at risk of missing the deadline. Sometimes after you look at your data, the information will jump out at you. However, if the answer isn't always clear, it can help to try to look at the data in another way. So let's give that a try. We are only showing the 2 supervisors here. But if Letitia had to look at 10 supervisors and their progress, it could be more confusing. So one thing she could do would be to see what percentage of each supervisor's total staff have been moved through each step of the process. So let's start by looking at step 1. Kowalski is ahead at this point, having completed 100% of step 1. Lee has only completed 33% of step 1. However, when we get to step 2, Kowalski has only completed this task for 11% of her staff, but Lee has completed it for 33% of his staff. By step 3, Kowalski has actually fallen to 0% completed. On the other hand, Lee has completed this step for 1 of his 6 employees, which is about 16% of his staff. But remember, Letitia's manager said that step 1 is the most time consuming. So although Lee has done a little in each step, Kowalski is closer to being done and just needs to gather some signatures. And I think we actually heard that exact thing in the chat. So take a moment to look at the data again, but just for one person this time. If you had to guess, where would you say that Lee has been slowed down in the progress? Was it step 1, 2, or 3?
I'd like you to notice that I've opened the Slido panel on the right-hand side of the screen. Take your mouse and click on the option A, B, or C that you feel is the best answer. When you are done, please click on Send. Okay, so let me check the chat real quick. I see a couple of folks have said step one. And if I go to the Slido polls, we have about 26 votes in. I'll give it a couple of more seconds. Okay, and Kim, it looks like the majority are saying A, step one.
Mm, good, we're in agreement. So why not steps 2 or 3? Remember, Lee still has several meetings to complete, so he should probably get a reminder about the upcoming deadline. Does anyone have any questions about this example or about data analysis in general?
If you do have a question, please type it in the chat box. By the way, if you would like to learn more about data analysis, please take the Partnership's full-day Introduction to Data Analysis class the next time it's held in your area. Okay, Danielle, you said that your Slido was not working. For the next Slido poll, you can just go ahead and type it in the chat, all right? I do apologize for that. Sometimes some agencies, their security does not allow Slido to pop up. Okay, but Kim, I don't see any questions at this time. So before we move on, I'd like you to notice that when I open the polling panel, the chat and participants panel may have closed. To reopen them, at the top right, find the word participants and click on the arrow next to it to reopen it. Find the word chat and click on that arrow next to it to reopen the panel as well. If the participants panel isn't open, you won't be able to raise your hand. If the chat panel isn't open, you won't be able to share your ideas with us. So we would like you to reopen them.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Eddie. So after you've gathered your information and analyzed the data, you're likely to have a lot of ideas floating around in your head. Some of those ideas may be more important than others based on the reason you are writing your report. This is also a good time to pause and organize your thoughts before you move on to writing the report. So let's talk about that next. One of the most important aspects of writing a report is making sure that your message is clear and well organized. If you don't think carefully about what you want to say, you will risk wasting your reader's time with rambling and unfocused ideas. One of the best ways to get your thoughts organized is to use an outline. Your outline can take whatever form you like because it is a tool for you. But the key is that it can help you identify which details should be included, which are left out, and what order you should present them so that they flow well from one to the next. It doesn't have to be a formal outline with letters and numbers. It can just be a list of ideas on a sheet of paper. Once you have all of your ideas down, select the most important ones. When you're trying to select your main ideas, don't forget to refer back to your goal. Who's going to be reading this report? That's your audience. And what do they want out of it? That's your purpose. Finally, you'll want to think about the order that you should discuss those ideas. You'll probably find that some ideas lead naturally to others. Some people like to start with the most important idea and then go on to those that are less important. Whichever order you choose, it should be logical and easy to follow. Let's look at a few of the things that Letitia has noticed. Since we know that her goal is to report on the status of performance evaluation submissions, which of these details is the most important? Or true, so this isn't a trick question. I'll read these out loud as well. A, Lee has fewer employees than Kolaski. B, Kolaski probably dislikes paperwork. Because who doesn't? C, only 7% of evaluations have been submitted. And D, meetings usually take longer than getting signatures or submitting evaluations.
I'd like you to notice that I've opened the Slido panel on the right-hand side of the screen. Take your mouse and click on the options A, B, C, or D that you feel is the most important idea. When you are done, please click on Send. And for those of you who Slido is not working, you can also type it in the chat A, B, C, or D. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna look at the chat first. See a few D's. Back to the Slido poll. I'll give it a few more seconds to get a couple of more votes to come in. The suspense. Okay, and Kim, the majority are saying D with 58%, and the next one is C with 36%.
Okay, interesting. So, based on this data, I would choose option C, that only 7% of evaluations have been submitted. I believe the manager who asked for this report will need to know that the majority of evaluations haven't been completed and the deadline is only a week away. But the next most important point is D. Meetings usually take longer than getting signatures or submitting evaluations. This idea is at the heart of our recommendations about who should get reminders about the upcoming deadline. The information about Kalaski not liking paperwork, well, that's only an opinion. Letitia believes that it's probably true, but remember, reports are meant to be factual and not opinion based as much as possible. So to keep her report short and to the point, she may want to leave that out. So based on what we just discussed, Letitia's outline might look something like this. As you can see, she started by jotting down her main points or ideas. Then she rearranged them so that one idea flows to another. And the nice thing about creating your a quick outline on a computer, is that you can use copy paste to rearrange your ideas. Once you've gotten your ideas in order, your conclusion should make sense based on those ideas. Are there any questions about how to organize ideas?
If you do have a question, please type it in the chat. Okay, I'll give everyone just a few more seconds. Okay, Michelle, can we access this video again? Yes, so I will make this video available by the end of this week in Slims. And then all you would have to do is just type in the name of this webinar and select the one that is listed as a self-instructed course. That is the recorded version. Okay. All right. Let me see. Do we have any other questions? We do not. So it's safe to say that we can move on.
Okay, so the final step in your report writing journey is to draft, review, edit, and then proofread your document. A report can be written in several formats. A short, informal report might be written and sent in an email. A longer report, especially one that will be viewed by people above your position, may be written as a memo or other format in Microsoft Word. Most reports have standard parts or sections. Short reports tend to only use the 3 sections in black. Longer or more formal reports may use the sections with the red strikeouts as well. However, every report will have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion section. So which of those 3 sections do you think you should start writing first?
I'd like you to notice that I've opened the Slido panel again on the right-hand side of the screen. Take your mouse and click on the option A, B, or C that you feel is the best answer. When you are done, please click on Send. Okay, let's see. We have 23 votes in so far in Slido. Check the chat. Nothing in the chat. I'll give Slido a few more seconds for some more votes to come in. Okay, and the majority are saying A, the introduction, followed by B, body at 26%.
Yeah. Are we all set, Eddie, you think, with Slido?
Yeah, we're all set. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna deactivate the poll.
Okay, perfect. So I'm not surprised by that answer because you think, well, it's a report. I'm going to introduce it and I'm going to start with the introduction. But let's look at this a little closer. I think it's easier to write the body of the report first. And let's talk about a bit more about these three sections in the order that they're read. So for the introduction, even short or informal reports start with an introduction. It only needs to be a few sentences long. The introduction gives a quick summary of the background of the situation, the issue itself, and it touches briefly on your conclusion. This is not the place for supporting details. This is the bird's eye view. So the rest of the report becomes clearer. And let's take a look at the body. The body is the heart of the report. In the body, you explain your main idea. If your report is a bit longer, you may need to write one or more paragraphs for each idea. When that happens, you may want to have a heading name separating each idea in your report. Headings help a person skim a document. Because your reader knows basically what will be covered in that section, they know whether to spend more or less time on it based on their background or knowledge. So remember when I mentioned it might be better to write the body first? The main discussion will actually become the basis for your introduction and conclusion. So you'll actually save yourself time, effort, potential headaches if you start with your main discussion or the body first. The conclusion of a report reminds people what your main points were, and it summarizes your findings based on your data. You'll want to relate your conclusion to the issue or problem you identified in your introduction. If you've been asked to give a recommendation, you'll add that here. If your recommendations have financial impacts, such as the suggestion to buy a specific printer, make sure you include estimated costs where possible. Are there any questions about the three sections of a short report?
If you do have a question, go ahead and type it in the chat. Okay, I'll give everyone a few more seconds to see if a question pops up. And Kim, we don't have any questions at this time.
Super. All right, writing tips. So the process of drafting and revising your writing is not unique to report writing. However, there are some general tips to help you with a report. The first piece of advice we have is for you to stay objective. Stick to the facts. This is important in report writing because the reader needs to know that you are presenting the information without bias and that they can trust you. Because of this, avoid either exaggerated or negative language. So instead of saying something like attendance was terrible, which gives a judgment on the situation, you might say attendance was lower than expected. How do you feel about the use
Okay, and Kim, I have three hands up in the air. And I just saw something pop up in the chat. And the people in the chat are saying no because it shows your opinions. Thank you everyone for participating.
Okay, so we had a lot of correct answers in there. Most people feel that reports should be a bit more formal than other kinds of writing. And because of that, you'll generally want to avoid using personal pronouns like me or I in your reports. After all, the information that you are putting in your reports comes out from the facts you found and is not just a matter of your personal opinion. So, as some people say, as the expression goes, the facts speak for themselves. Next, be concise. This means to be brief, but also informative. Avoid run on or rambling sentences and try to make your points quickly. All right, let's see if everybody's still awake, Eddie. Do you think the statement reports should stick to facts whenever possible is true or false?
I'd like you to notice that once again, the Slido panel has been opened, which can be located on the right-hand side of the screen. Take your mouse and click on the option A for true or B for false that you feel is the best answer. When you are done, please click on send. Okay, let me check the chat. And right now there's nothing in the chat for Slido. And Slido, we have 32 votes, 33. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna close it. And the majority, which with 97% saying A, true.
I am in agreement. One of the hallmarks of a good report is that it's objective and it sticks to the facts. So that brings us almost to the end of today's webinar. The next step is up to you, and you have homework. So please send me a short report typed using Microsoft Word. We've emailed you in your handouts information about the goal of your report as well as the data that you will need to write it. A few paragraphs will be fine, but remember, it should have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. We've made this an informal emailed report. I know everyone here may be at different levels of experience. Some of you have never written reports before. Some of you write reports daily. That's normal. Just do your best with this assignment. Once you complete your assignment, please email your report to me. My email address is on the screen, and that is, for this particular assignment, homework@crlcalbany.org. Thanks for sharing that, Eddie. Once I've received your writing sample, I'll try to make some helpful comments on your report writing and then send it back to you. Please send me your report within 1 week from today, which is July 26th.
Please note that you cannot print your certificate from the SLIM system until your assignment is received and your attendance has been updated in SLIMs. So you must submit your writing assignment to be marked completed for this class. I went ahead and I included the email, which you should send the homework to, and the due date, which is a week from today, July 26th.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your participation. I know there are some questions in chat that I think Eddie will get to in a moment. So before we completely move to the Q&A period, I'd like to turn this back over to Eddie.